Welcome to Global Express. I'm Neena Gopal. This is the new Indian Express's weekly interaction with experts where we analyze the impact of developments in our backyard, on our neighborhood, on India. Do click on the new Indian Express website and tweet and follow Global Express. This week, with all eyes on G20, making it India's moment to shine at a forum which brings the world's most powerful nations together on one platform, we examine two aspects of such summitry. One, the bitter geopolitical rivalry between the United States and China and its fallout on the India-China relationship. The deep divide between the West and Russia post the invasion of Ukraine, and of course the Russian President Vladimir Putin's absence at the summit, and the impact that could have on a Delhi declaration if they manage to push through one. India has put food insecurity, banks, climate change, and debt at the forefront. But with G20, a divided house, is this joint statement feasible? I mean, the absent Chinese president, Xi Jinping, is objecting strongly to Indian language inferences in the joint statement. And great power rivalry or not, is Modi's India, much to Xi's discomfort, seen as a more natural, empathetic leader of the global south? The second aspect, of course, is taking a good hard look at the US President Joe Biden's special bilateral with Prime Minister Modi ahead of the G20. It's taking place less than 4 months after our Prime Minister's state visit to the United States. So is India being prodded, cajoled, wooed, is into taking on the role as the Asian counterbalance to an increasingly belligerent Xi Jinping's China, as the US's focus now spans not just the Euro-Atlantic, but the Indo-Pacific. And, are we being outsourced to the India-Pacific? So talking us through how India navigates these decidedly choppy waters are two eminent experts on geopolitics and military strategy. Professor Bharat Karnad is Professor Emeritus National Security Studies at the Center for Policy Research and the author of numerous books, including Why India is Not a Great Power Yet, Strategic Sellout, India's Nuclear Deal, India's Nuclear Policy. He's also a Distinguished Fellow at the United Service Institution of India, a Master of Realpolitik. Welcome, Professor. And welcome, Lieutenant General Anil Ahuja, Distinguished Fellow at the Vivekananda International Foundation, former co-commander, Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff for Policy Planning and Force Development. He's been co-chair of the India-US Interagency Task Force on Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. He's also served as India's defense attaché to Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Interestingly, Vietnam, that's where US President Joe Biden, who skipped ASEAN, is headed. My first question is to you, Professor Karnad. Are being loved to be feted, to be seen, to be heard at summits like the G20. But the G20 looks like a very divided house. I mean, not just between the major powers, but between developed and developing nations. The whole point of G20 when it was founded in 1999 was for developed countries to lift the developing countries out of poverty. So India claims it has helped alleviate the debt during its presidency. Sri Lanka, Ethiopia, Ghana, Zambia. But in the absence of these two giants at the G20, the Russian president and the Chinese president, and China's, almost hegemonistic belligerence towards not just India, but a slew of Southeast Asian and East Asian countries, does this G20 have any provenance? Is Emperor Xi has been, is being dubbed. He wants the Belt and Road Initiative included in the final communique. He doesn't want any mention of Ukraine. Can India pull this off? Have we expended all this energy and resources? To what end, Professor Karnad?
Well, look, I think the fact is that the Sherpas who have been meeting in Manisa have tried very hard to paper over the differences. And I'm not sure that they're quite achieved the purpose, meaning there's still the very wide differences on Ukraine. and the fact that the Chinese have raised this cultural objection, as it were, about the Indian theme that the Prime Minister has talked about of
Vasudeva
one
Kutumbakam.
family, one world, one family, one future, and so on. And the Sanskrit, of course, concept from which it is derived. He simply doesn't want it because he sees in this construct a competitor to the Chinese notion of Tianxia, which is their notion of order under the heaven. It's not dissimilar, but except that, in the Tianxia system, it is the Chinese overlordship that everybody has to reconcile to. So that's very different from a more benign notion of what the Prime Minister has been proposing. But you see, for the Chinese, and of course the Russian, their absence is going to, in some sense, subtract from the grandeur and the importance of the G20 meeting, except that, if you recall, G20 is meant to discuss economic issues, by and large.
Absolutely.
To discuss economic issues. Ukraine or these other issues that the Chinese have raised really find no place in the original charter of the G20. So
that's very interesting.
These are extraneous things that, the Chinese, and of course, Ukraine has been brought in by the EU and the United States because they really want to corral Russia and pillory it in an international forum where the global South issues of global South is are going to be debated. So they want to make it a universal issue, and I'm not sure it's going to work simply because in real terms, the Ukraine war is just an intra-European conflict, and somehow the other, EU and the US have taken on themselves to try and make it into a world war where everybody takes sides. Well, we are not bothered with it, and that's what Jaishankar came out and said the other day. That the European countries don't want to bother with what happens elsewhere in the world. Why should we in the third world or the developing world be concerned about a conflict in Europe? You look out for yourselves, we look out for ourselves and the conflicts that we have to face. And so that is that. And I think it is said very plainly, it was plain speak that got through. And in a sense, I think it established a principle for other global South states to adopt. And that's why there was this very large contingent of states that simply sat on the fence, now still sitting on the fence, because they say it's none of our business. And really, you take care of your business and don't involve us in it because we have no stake in it. We have no stake in the fight. And that's where matters stand. But it is a major, major problem because the Americans are pushing very hard, and the Russians, with Sergei Lavrov, who is standing in for Putin, equally determined not to have any mention of Ukraine without an entire Russian side and their position being articulated as the Russians would have it. So, it becomes entirely unwieldy, and there's no consensus. As I said, it's one thing to try and paper over differences. It's quite another to try and, in a sense, make a leap over, shall we say, the Grand Canyon. You can't, it's too wide a rift, really, between positions, between the European and the American and the Russian and the Chinese, because the Chinese are sort of quasi-siding with the Russians on this aspect. So Ukraine, unfortunately, has taken over and dominated
G20
the discussions. And I think this is not really how it was intended. And in some sense, therefore, it has derailed the Indian Prime Minister's intent to make G20 about development, about reducing disparities and addressing the major debt repayment problems that many, many developing countries face, including most of the countries in our neighborhood.
Sri Lanka,
and so on.
Yeah, 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 fantastic. General, if I can just turn to you on Russia itself, I mean, whether the final communique of the G20 condemns or holds off on wrapping Russia on Ukraine, do we run the risk, does India run the risk of alienating this, such a reliable ally, like Russia? I mean, we have a legacy relationship, and Moscow values its long-standing ties with India. India still buys Russian oil. Apart from Germany, it's one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil. 60% of our defense equipment is of Russian origin. I mean, we understand why Vladimir Putin cannot be seen standing shoulder to shoulder with the leaders of the very countries that he's war with. But how do you see Russia-India ties evolving going forward? I mean, now that India is conducting joint exercises with the US, India's third largest arms supplier is the US. We're concluding agreements to buy $20 million in defense. Could you tell me where you see India Russia going?
Yeah, Neena, you are right. This is an extremely important relationship for us. And you mentioned about our legacy relationship. And while we call the US comprehensive global strategic partner, equally, Russia is a special privileged strategic partner. Now, when the world looks at it, they realize we are tightrope walking. And let me put it across, even the world is also tightrope walking. You can't afford to ignore India's stance or ignore country of India's stature. So yes, there are concerns. Somebody called it a position of formal neutrality. And you must have read last year, a piece was written by Ashley Tellis where he was mentioning that India's response is not driven by any abstract considerations of global order. It's done by its very brute calculations of its national interests and how souring of relations with Russia, what implications will it have on security? So true, we have a delicate balance, and as the war prolongs, that balancing becomes more and more delicate. We have our wide-ranging relationship, whether it's political, diplomatic, military, technology, economic, all facets of relationship. But the most important, as we see, is our defense relationship and our relationship presently for energy. Now, let me focus on defense aspect of the relationship. Now, there was a time not very long back when about 80% of our equipment used to be of Russian origin. About decade and a half, 2 decades back, it started coming down to about 60 odd percent. Today, if you look at the latest statistics, today we have about say 60 to 65%, and our imports have considerably come down over the years. Now, they have come down, and even the Russia's share in the global market has come down. About 15 years back, they used to have about 26% share, and today it has come down to about 16 odd percent share globally. So there's a trend, and not only this trend today, but if you like to extrapolate it, every year in the CIPRI report, the statistics come out as to what are the global arms on order with various countries. Now, even if you look at the order books, say the French order books are much heavier than the Russian order books today. In every field, you have around 200 odd aircraft on orders with the French, and you just have about 80, 90 odd with the Russians. You have French having orders of about 20, 21 ships, whereas Russia has got just about 5 odd ships, artillery guns, where France has got about 170 odd. There's none on order there. And in terms of armored vehicles, again, the orders are hugely more with other countries. So what I'm trying to arrive at is that this trend of tapering down of our inventory has been not only of India saying that no, I'll not buy from Russia, I'll buy from another country. It's been a progressive trend. It keeps pace with the dwindling share of Russians in the global arms market, alternatives available to us. And yes, definitely in things like defense preparation, we have to explore options, but that by no means undermines our relationship with Russia or the significance of the depth of our strategic partnership that we have. Uh, you know, just a few days back, Andrei Kartonov, he's the academic director of Russia International Affairs Council. He wrote a small piece for NatStrat. Now, he said, is Russia losing India? Now,
That's why I asked the question. Yeah.
it can be interpreted the other way around also. So the fact is that, yes, we have a challenge. We have differences on various issues, and we have our concerns of Russia's growing proximity to China and increasing proximity with Pakistan. Now, in terms of China, but we have to remain mindful that our major concerns with Russia, they pertain to our continental dimension of our security, with the US largely in the maritime domain. And then, of course, we have to also see that China's and Russia's differences, mutual differences, they haven't just vanished in the air. Russia still considers itself as a European power. So the issue is, India has its relevance for Russia. Russia has its relevance, great relevance for us. So while there'll be some kind of balancing that will take place, but we are distancing, we are balancing, but at the same time, it's not a zero-sum game between our relationship with Americans or the West or with Russia. So it's a difficult thing, but I think if we continue to invest and take cognizance of the kind of question that you asked, our relationship will sustain and we'll be able to nurture.
Professor Karnad, if I can come back to you, we've been looking at Xi's absence from the from G20, and there have been reports after about how he's shoring up his war machine, that he's dusting off plans to invade Taiwan, that that he didn't turn up at G20 because he doesn't want to share the space with India swanning it at the event. Or that there could be rumblings at home. Is Xi Jinping still calling the shots in China?
Yeah, I believe he is. After all, it's been history. The Chinese history shows that at any given time, there's only one emperor. And this particular emperor has, in a sense, consolidated his rule by taking care to see that the opposition has been, shall we say, decimated, and has been particularly keen to cultivate and keep cultivated the PLA, the commanders and so on. Most of them are his choice. They've been put in strategic places. And PLA is the main prop for the Communist Party rule in China. So PLA is the one thing that she takes care to have on his side. So yes, I would say that he pretty much holds the key and runs China as he thinks fit. Of course, he has his own agenda. He's talked about making China, just as our prime minister has said that in these the Amrit Kal and so on, we want to be a developed country. He says the Chinese designers, the Xi's designers, that by 2049, the centenary celebrations of the Communist Party rule in China, China will be the dominant power, if not a peer rival of the United States. But it certainly means to make it the numero uno power in the world. And so that is something that he has been trying very hard and to a great extent successfully to get the kind of military heft, the technological heft, and so on that describe great power.
So this India actually bringing in the African Union into the G20, that's G21. A lot of analysts are now saying that it's because India and China are jostling for the leadership of the global South. You know, that Beijing believes that India is punching away way above its weight, at G20 and other global forums. Do you agree? Do you think that India could realistically become a leader, a spokesperson, or an advocate of the global South? Would it be a better fit than China?
Oh, absolutely. I think the fact is that China has really hurt its reputation because of its what they call the pocketbook diplomacy. They have given out loans at extortionist rates, and they're very, very serious of asking for returns on the loans given. I mean, there's no give there in terms of tolerating, late repayments, etc. They want their pound of flesh in terms of returns. Now, that's something that India has, fortunately today, has never gone into that line, simply because we haven't really expended that kind of resource, that level of resources on development tasks and projects and so on. And in that sense, we have been laggards, actually. I remember Shyam Saran telling me a few years back that the Kaladan multimodal transport corridor, etc., that would connect India to the Indian Northeast to Myanmar was still hanging fire. Why? Because of last mile connectivity. I mean, you get everything done, and then you don't connect up the last mile for various reasons. Similarly, you have financial constraints in what we can expend in these projects. And we have not been as, shall we say, good as the Chinese have been in delivering projects on time and within the stated price line. And, we have made all kinds of promises to Central Asian republics, for instance, that we haven't delivered. We haven't delivered on that. And, so there are minuses and pluses on both sides. But on balance, I think India has an advantage where Africa is concerned, because Chinese have proven particularly brutal and ruthless in investing in extractive industries, all the minerals and so on, the Congo, and then treating the Africans very badly, and they're no better, as the Africans see them, than the Imperial Belgian in the Congo, for instance,
and France now more,
and the French, of course, in Niger, the uranium-rich Niger, and so on. And so this is something that the Chinese have not been able to overcome, the arrogance, the sense of entitlement to power, the sense of, in a sense, replacing the colonial overlords. So
that's very interesting.
Yes, and therefore the Africans see themselves in a neo-colonial position vis-a-vis China, which they don't vis-a-vis India. And just anecdotally, the thing is, way back from the 50s onwards, one of the things that India very imaginatively did, Nehruvian India at the time, they sent out teachers of English and mathematics to Ethiopia. For instance, why is Ethiopia so close to India? Because most of the leaders were actually taught by Indian teachers.
You're right.
Emotionally, they're very, very close. They feel close to India. They think they owe India their education, their upliftment, and so on. So that's the sort of thing we bring in dealing with the African states, which China simply cannot summon, is that that soft power. It's all very well to set up Confucius institutes, but if you're not going to treat them well, you're not really going to make friends. And that is where I think India has an absolute advantage. There's no question about it. If you were to put India up against China in Africa, India would win hands down.
Very interesting point, actually. I want to also look at this, the ASEAN summit and India's, Act East policy. Is India living up to that hype? I mean, because, one sees India's transformation into the US's arm in Asia, with this expanding maritime reach. There's talk of Indonesia building a naval base at Banda Aceh, barely 80 kilometers from Indira Point, our last outpost. And there's also talk of our newly acquired Rafale fighter jets being stationed at the existing airstrip in Car Nicobar. So, and similarly, the Philippines is going to allow the US to set up a missile base in Batanes, right next to Taiwan. India is selling a naval warship, small as it is, to Vietnam, plus 7 speedboats. Is this what India should be doing, General? Not just manufacture and sale of defense equipment, but work on a strategy to have a string of, bases with middle powers with which it shares the concerns over China's assertiveness, in keeping the South China. But if India continues on this path, Professor Karnad, if you can let us join in after the general, what can we expect from Xi? Will he up the ante? Will he prod elements in Pakistan and Afghanistan? I mean, Gilgit-Baltistan is already up in flames, and so on. General, if we can go with you first.
Neena, before I specifically answer your question, just allow me for a minute of rewind to complement what Professor Karnad said about our relationship with African countries. Complementing our diplomatic initiatives, we've taken a number of initiatives with the African countries in field of defense. We have training teams in a number of countries. We have it in Tanzania, we have it in Namibia, we have it in Seychelles.
Defense training? Defense
training teams. And then last 2 defense expos, 2020 in Lucknow and 2022 in Gandhinagar. Now, in the first one, we had the defense ministers conclave. The second one, again, we had a defense dialogue, and we issued something called Gandhinagar Declaration. And it talks about training, it talks about cooperation, carrying out joint exercises, cyber, UN.
We also have peacekeeping troops.
Training.
Yeah, I remember visiting them in Congo.
Correct. So what I'm trying to say is that these efforts are complemented in the defense field, and the stature being given is the significance being accorded in each of these defense expos biennially. I'll leave it there. I just thought I'll compliment what Professor Karnad.
No, that's very interesting. I forgot about the defense aspect.
No, it's
You're
okay.
Right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
So
on the Act East policy.
Act East policy. You expressed your concern at the Chinese heckles being raised with what defense cooperation we are doing with the countries in Southeast Asia. Let me put it across in a little lighter vein. If a deer expects that in a jungle the tiger will not eat it because the deer itself is a vegetarian, I think that's a mistaken notion. We thought for a very long time, for a number of years, that there were countries which for years have been asking for missiles, India's weapon systems. I mean, BrahMos has been a favorite for more than 2 decades. Now, the question is, we were always very cautious. That no,
too cautious.
Yes, we should not arm these countries in the neighborhood of China, even to get a perception that we are trying to build these countries as a counter to China and they can pose a threat to China by using our weapons and our equipment. We did that, but did it prevent the Chinese doing what they are doing in Nepal, what they are doing in Myanmar, what they are doing in Bangladesh, what they are now trying to do in Bhutan? Did it prevent them? Pakistan, of course, is a different issue altogether. So the issue is we have to build our relationships. We have to build our strategic partnerships. And there is a soft power and there is the element of hard power, which has its significance. Now, coming to a couple of instances that you quoted. Now, this issue of, the port at Sabah. Well, I think it's been, it's been misinterpreted and there have been certain Indonesian sensitivities also to it. That in 2018, mid 2018, when this issue of, India's cooperation in building the port at Sabang was concerned, and one of their ministers for coordination of maritime security, he said that, oh, this place has got a depth of 40 meters deep water and submarines can also come there.
That's right.
Many of us also started saying that, oh, it's a military facility that will be accorded to us. And it wasn't taken too well because it was proposed as an infrastructure project. And prior to that, the South Koreans, they'd had talks with South Koreans, they've had talks with the Japanese on this issue. So the fact is that yes, there are issues of infrastructure development, there are issues of cooperation, and a premature assigning of a military connotation to it, in the long term, it becomes counterproductive. Now,
that's interesting.
Second thing about Vietnam. Vietnam has had Russian origin equipment for its Army, Navy, Air Force. We've had, I remember way back in 2004, 2005, we used to have these Taruntal class ships, which we were phasing out. We gave them a lot of spares because, yes, we were moving on. We could share with them. Now we've gifted them this ship, which you mentioned about. And those 7 boats that you are talking is part of $100 million credit line that was given to them a couple of years back. And we have another $500 million credit line, defense credit line, which is still pending with them. They still have to utilize it.
Oh, that's interesting.
That's part of our coming together. That's part of our defense cooperation. And quite like Chinese, we also maintain that this is not directed against any particular country. This is helping a partner, a friendly country, build its own capability. What it does with its own capability is his business.
Except Vietnam is the only country that actually took the Chinese to the cleaners during a war.
Yeah, they did 1979. I mean, we all aware of that now. So let's look at it now. Philippines is an ally of the US. What it does, where it allows, where they deploy weapons, that's their sovereign outlook. But definitely, we have to maintain relationships. We have to strengthen our defense relationships, and that's what we are doing. And we should do it extremely confidently that we have a right to develop our relations in Southeast Asia. And what anybody feels about it, well, I think they also have mirrors on their walls.
Okay. Professor Karnad, if you could come in on our Act East policy.
I think we have been remiss in not emphasizing hard power. That's been our bane 1947 onwards. And when you deal with a country like China that believes in hard power and realpolitik, These are the principles that drive and should have driven Indian foreign policy from the beginning. And we are only beginning to discover it now. And then, because being laggards in hard geopolitics, what has happened is the Chinese have taken, in some sense, a march over us in a very substantial sort of way. And we're trying very hard to scamper after them to recover whatever little
playing catch up.
Prerogatives we would have otherwise exercised. The fact is, I remember as member of the first National Security Advisory Board in 1998, the then Foreign Secretary, a chap called Raghunath, I remember, coming up before us. And I asked him then, did you not ever conceive of the possibility of very speedily arming Vietnam with the BrahMos missile on priority basis? Deprioritize your own demand. India is not all that, is not on the front lines as Vietnam is. Give it to them as a first instance, as top priority before you even arm yourselves. Give it to them so that what you end up doing is what I've been suggesting, which is narrow the seas for China. What does that mean, narrowing the seas? That's what I said in my 2015 book, Why It Is Not a Great Power Yet, that you mentioned. The fact is, if you narrow the seas by arming, the Chinese have created, unfortunately for the Chinese Navy, they've created these ersatz islands in South China Sea. So if you arm countries on both sides with the BrahMos missile, you can make it very difficult for Chinese ships to pass through the Malacca Straits.
Yes, absolutely.
This side of Malacca. Now, this is the sort of thing we should have thought of. Nobody did. Now, the Indian military, I'm afraid, has never been strategic minded. Now, they can always blame the government, saying, well, the government had no strategic roles for us, so we were landlubbers, just worried about Pakistan, which is not a threat at all, has never been a threat. And we have neglected, therefore, the most strategic aspects of our military, venture, as it were. Because the only credible threat that India has is China. That's the
Absolutely.
only threat. China, and I've always said, now this is for going on 35, 40 years, that Pakistan is a nuisance, not a threat. The fact that India has not been able to distinguish between nuisance and threat is what has put India back to where we are. We are really not in the running, even now. And the fact is, in a military sense, and we haven't addressed the Chinese, the Chinese
threat
they have created in the island chain that they have made out of coral and cement mid-channel in the South China Sea. We still haven't given out BrahMos missiles, as we should have handed them out. Just give it to them. And I've been saying, give nuclear-tipped missiles to Vietnam. Why? Because they nuclear missile armed Pakistan, for God's sake.
Yes, they did.
The entire balance. And yet we haven't responded. What is our problem? This is what really frustrates me. Because the Indian government is such a timid entity. And what comes through is timidity. You can talk all you want, but the fact is, if your actions don't suggest that you're going to take China seriously, you're not going to get the respect that you think you deserve by berating our neighbors, small neighbors, Pakistan. You'll beat up on Maldives tomorrow or Bhutan or something. What are you doing? China is our main thing. We have 3 strike corps. Of course, now I'm told, I was told the other day by a senior army man that, Mr. Karnad, what you have been suggesting for 30 years, we are doing it. We are keeping the establishment in shell, for 2 corps and have 1 corps there and 2 corps moving to the China front, etc. All this,
finally,
why go through the pretense of it? Offensive mountain corps, to 2 more to add to the 17 corps. And then have 1 composite dam corps for any Pakistan contingency. It's never going to happen. It's never going to happen because, this is something most obvious kind of strategic, shall we say, reality that we have not worked on. And this is what we need to now do on a war footing. If I may address what the general said earlier, about diversification of arms. I'm sorry, but the trouble is, are we completely sure that the more diversified our weapons inventory, the better it is for India? Because the logistics is a major problem, as everybody admits within the military. You can't handle. The other day, Air Chief Marshal Chowdhury at a forum said, we have 44 types of aircraft. My God, it is something that, most of our friendly states, they have the eyes popping out when they hear that there are 44 types of aircraft. Where the heck is the supply lines and supply chains to get these damn things in real time operational? We have not been able to manage our inventory very well. And in war, the good thing is we have only had very short wars. Had there been a sustained war, we'd have got it in the neck. And that's a fact of life. These are
Professor, can I just ask you another question? I'm sure the general will want to respond to what you said, but before he does that, I just want to ask you, from the time of President George W. Bush through the Obama presidency and now Joe Biden, what was it that made the US home in on India? Why did it start seeing China as the adversary and a challenger in the Indo-Pacific, and then, sort of now begin this buttressing of India, sort of to take on the China challenge? What was the trigger? Was there one or a series of events? What was it?
No, look, with the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Americans had to then began shifting their strategic focus to China, because the Taiwan issue was still unresolved. You had North Korea there, which had gained nuclear weapons, again, courtesy China. That's what I've talked about, the rogue triad that I've written about. It's actually China, Pakistan, North Korea. And these three parties just transfer technologies among each other and share it. When China doesn't want to be in the forefront of proliferating, they pass it through the Pakistani channel to North Korea. When you yesterday, you had, the North Korean Kim Jong-un coming out and saying, we have developed a nuclear submarine.
Yes.
And hunter killer nuclear submarine. What nonsense. This is the Chinese handing over some old rubbishy tub to them. It is so loud, you can perhaps hear the damn thing coming out of the port in the Indian Ocean. Forget about in the East. So the problem is, we have to begin to understand that the Americans will deal with these threats in their own way. The thing about the United States is this, and this is what Kissinger said long back: America doesn't have to have a strategy because it has the resources. They can foul up tomorrow and then begin concentrating on the threat and get it going, and they're at battle speeds, and they get something out that can be truly substantial by way of a counter. A country like India doesn't have that, shall we say, luxury. You have to strategize and to allocate our resources accordingly and wisely, which we haven't done. But you talked about the George W. Bush and H.W. Bush and why it is that, first of all, the Berlin Wall and Russia being berated as a threat. Then China's extraordinary galloping, rocketing economic rise. But
that was also courtesy the Americans.
Of
their
course.
rise. Yeah.
Absolutely. The whole Deng Xiaoping thing was opened up by the Nixon opening to China. And Kissinger was mainly responsible for it.
Correct.
And of course, he was warned at the time by many people I know in Washington who said, look, we are going the wrong way in trying to open the doors to China, because they'll utilize the American technologies and so on to lift themselves up and become peer competitors, which they are now. And the problem really is for America is that they are so dependent on the Chinese cheap consumer items, just as India is, incidentally. Why we cannot speedily detach ourselves, just as the Americans cannot, from the Chinese supply lines and the Chinese the economy. And this is the real trouble, because we did not have the strategic sight to see, as the Americans did not. Except the Americans have the resources, as I said again, let me emphasize, where they can foul up strategically. and get back
Yeah.
on track. We don't have the luxury, and we have been error prone from the very beginning. Our government, our military, just about everybody else, and we have been, in a sense, we have got derailed, as it were, in our effort to mount a reasonable and credible counter to China.
General, if I can bring you in, do you think that we are taking the wrong path by taking on a major power like China? I mean, do we have the military chops to take on a major power like China? I mean, we've got a military footprint now in our maritime. We're spreading that also. I mean, we've had, we're trying to get closer to Mauritius. We're trying to get, we have a base open in the Maldives. What do you say? Is it a prudent move? And is this what is driving the US-India relationship?
Okay. You had briefly, while you posed the question to Professor Karnad, you had given me an option to, I wouldn't like to respond anything to the eminent professor. I respect his views. But at the same time, I'd like to make 4 short points before I answer your question. And I mean, that's a perspective, a point of view. Firstly, yes, I agree. We've had hesitation in the past, which persists even till today. We haven't fully overcome it, of defense cooperation, of lethal arming. I mean, we've had any number of debates in trying to calibrate what we should give, and we should give lethal weapons or non-lethal weapons, what kind of a aid. Fortunately, we are overcoming this hesitation of defense cooperation. You've heard of BrahMos missiles for Philippines. You've heard of Pinakas and Akash and various other weapon systems, some given, some being contemplated. So yes, this is a weakness which is being overcome. Whose weakness? I think I'll leave it at that. That's not really relevant. The second aspect, BrahMos, I fully agree. Yes, perhaps we could have done it much longer because in any case, China is doing what it is doing in our neighborhood without really bothering whether we do it or we are benign. They'll do it anyway. What is in
That's
their
right.
interest? So we've come of age, and we've become a little more bold. Maybe not to professor's expectation, but we leave it there. As far as nuclear tipped is concerned, I wouldn't like to comment on it. I leave it there. Now, in terms of consolidating inventories, diversifying inventories, well, I can say with a little bit of personal experience, having sat in the middle of it as the secretary of the Defense Acquisition Council for 2 years, just to share a perspective. Well, if we had our defense industry of the magnitude that perhaps the Americans have, we could have chosen what we want. But over the years, we are aware as to how in trickles we inducted some American equipment, we inducted some French equipment, we inducted some Russian equipment, we had some Yugoslav guns with our artillery.
Really?
And, yeah, we had. I mean, 40 years back when we joined as second lieutenants, we used to be firing some of those guns. But
good God,
that's history now. So today, the question is a balance between a totally diversified inventory, what was forced on us by our inability to produce our weapons, by our lack of capability, our various constraints. Now, the second end, the opposite end of the spectrum is when you are not self-reliant fully, when it's not your equipment, you are not producing it. So the challenge of putting all the eggs in one basket. Now, these two have to be balanced. And the second thing we have to understand is, with lack of our manufacturing and R&D capability, we have to plan for our needs of today and make a distinction with our needs, planning for our needs of the long term for tomorrow. So
That's
we are
interesting.
looking
So
at
is that what is driving our
so
US-India relationship?
yes, and yes, there are shortcomings, but these are the challenges which comes to this part. Now, next you asked that do we have the capability to handle China? Well, firstly, I think each one of us is aware of our economic differential, our military differential, our technology differential. We are quite aware. But mindful of that differential, we adopted something which was more suited to us. Uh, for the Chinese, deploying permanent troops permanently, whether it was in Dolam or whether it was now in Eastern Ladakh. Now, Chinese permanent deployments across the line of actual control are are fairly recent. What
That's
we
right.
had was what we had was for quite some time, for years, we've had ab initio deployment of troops along the
Oh,
line of actual control so that you have the troops deployed, they are acclimatized, the weapons are deployed, you are forward deployed. Because the other side had the initiative. So we have overcome certain amount of challenges in our own way. We are not matching aircraft to aircraft, gun to gun. Yes, there are problems. But at the same time, we are quite up to holding the Chinese threat back, right and proper. We have experienced it in Eastern Ladakh. We saw it in December in
yeah.
area east of Tabang. So the fact is, India is not a pushover, but we can do it better by balancing between continental and maritime domain, distributing our resources, and planning it a little better by visualizing the future battle.
So this India-US relationship, if I can just go back to Professor Karnad, what is driving the? I mean, Joe Biden has just landed. He's going to go into a meeting with the Prime Minister. They're going to talk about, according to what the spokesperson has said about the Predator drones, jet engine deals, civil nuclear deal. I mean, a whole load of deals, including a railway line, apparently, which will connect India to the Arab world. But is India getting, turning into an ally, or is it a partner? How can you define this relationship now between Washington and Delhi,
I think
Professor?
it's a strategic relationship of necessity, simply because I think both China and India realize that India and the US realize that China is too big to handle singly by one or the other country, because it's really its presence and so on. And the fact that unlike India and the US, which are democracies and therefore have to answer to the people for the money spent, Xi Jinping doesn't have to do any of that. He's not accountable. And therefore, he has the freedom to do as he wishes and to pursue the national interest, the Chinese national interest, as he sees it. That said, I think the fact is, and this, in some sense, goes back to the opening that the general gave me about Atmanirbhar, because this is where the deals with the Americans are going to come centrally into the reckoning. The fact is that the Indian military, and I'm sorry for targeting the Indian military, because there's much blame to go around, to spread around all over in the Indian government. But in the Indian military, as the end user, has always been, shall we say, import fixated. They have, always prized imports, and especially Western imports, rather than either the Russian or indigenous. And had we, from the very beginning, had the attitude that we are going to very speedily get into the Atmanirbhar mode, become self-sufficient, as we started out in the 50s. DRDO and all the DPSUs, the Defense Public Sector Units, are really a mess. They're low productivity, low labor productivity, bad management. I mean, you can just go on down the list and literally hold your head in your hands looking at what they produce. They are just awful, plain awful. And yet the Indian government, and I wish this is where I unfortunately, the Modi government, which is right-wing, as I'm right-wing, I'm an Edmund Burke conservative, and simply don't want the government in our lives. I want minimal government and the private sector to take over. Private sector has enormous capabilities, but the Indian government and the Indian military simply doesn't want to trust them.
But I don't think that's true anymore, isn't it? I mean,
it is still true. I'm sorry, it's still true, because the main contracts are still being directed through the DPSUs, with the L&Ts and the Tatas and the Mahindras coming in as subcontractors. That's a fact. A general would bear that out for me. That's really the fact. Now, you have an L&T, for instance, that is producing a nuclear-powered ballistic missile firing submarine, a strategic, right? And yet we don't trust it to make a conventional diesel submarine, the Project 75I. See the irony of it? We had the first jet aircraft produced anywhere outside America and Europe, up in the skies in 56, yes. The first prototype of the Marut HF-24 flew in 1956. Within 5 years of Dr. Kud Tank getting the commission from Nehru to design and build combat aircraft. Pilots who have flown it have said that there's no better aircraft. And yet we ditched the Mark II that our own indigenous Dr. Raj Mahindra had designed, because the Indian Air Force plonked for the wretched low-level Jaguar. See what happens? The British aerospace gets the custom. The Indian capability is trashed, junked, and this is what, in some sense, thank God, we have retrieved the Tejas. Tejas was heading for the trash heap if the Indian Air Force had any say. Fortunately, it's been recovered. And yet, now the Indian Air Force is using Tejas as a cover for importing more Rafales, more this, more that. This is really why we really have to get out of this import fixation. You can come up with all kinds of excuses, mind you. I can come up with better ones than the military can, but it doesn't help the cause of self-reliance. And then we say, well, we have the diversified inventory of weapons because we are not self-reliant. Arey Baba, if you're not going to give your own industry and not the DPSUs, which are worse than useless, and a drain on Indian taxpayers' money, your and my money, and let the private sector work for profit. Profit is not bad. No one is going to do it for nothing. Profit is good.
That's very interesting. General, do you have a counter to that? And can you also please talk to us about the Indo-US strategic relationship? What would be your recommendations to make it, go forward?
Okay. Now, the point.
We're running out of time. I have to tell you.
Okay.
But please answer this.
The issue is some of the points made. It would require a separate show to discuss many of those. And
okay.
What I would just say is some of the observations regarding DPSUs, DRDO, etc., for which a committee has recently been set in, some of the observations that have been made are very valid, but this often repeated accusation of the import-oriented mindset of the Indian Armed Forces, I think it's a little unfair. That's my view without getting into the argument.
Can we move on to the US-India relationship, because I'm absolutely running out of time.
Okay, so
because we've got an MOU.
I'll leave it there. And there are other challenges which we can discuss separately.
Yeah.
Now, the
Because I
challenges
mean,
that
India's now announced its intent to acquire drones. There's an MOU between GE and HAL for the manufacture of aero engines. So I want to talk about: is it going to be? It's going to be defense and strategic, and is this making us? And you've taken part in this defense technology and trade initiative. You've talked about how the initiative on critical and emergent technologies is there could be movement on that. But what I want to basically focus on is the next step. Are we then going to be the US's strong arm in Asia?
see, what we are doing is we are trying to be a strong arm of India. That, well, if as part of network and of partners and allies and all, if we have our contribution, we have our contribution. But we are building our capability. Now, as far as drones are concerned, as far as GE engine are concerned, I would like to reiterate what I had said. One, we have to look at building what we need our capability for today and now for our operational needs. The drones that we are getting, 31 of these, they are addressing the most critical void of intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance that we have, both in the maritime and in the continental domain. So that's because we don't have that capability. So it will fill that void. And we have some things in our pipeline. I hope that they are continued, that momentum is maintained, so that ultimately we become reliant as far as GE engines are concerned. Now, it's a good thing that they'll be manufactured, co-developed here, but let's wait and see how much of technology will come. But at the same time, don't let our own aero engine programs die down or taper down. Ultimate salvation, ultimate reliance is our own capability.
Self-reliance, yes.
No technology comes gift wrapped, and we can't absorb it overnight. It takes time. And we don't have the luxury of secure borders and friendly neighbors. So we can't take a pause and build our capability. We have to develop the capability as we move along, as we fight along. Now, that's a huge challenge. And that's the reason for many of the things which Professor Karnad said.
Thank you very much, General. If I can just end with Professor Karnad. So are we ally or partner? What are we? Or just, a pawn of the US?
No, I think we are just very good friends. We are contingent friends. We'll use each other's resources and each other politically and so on when it suits our purposes, our single purposes, meaning they'll use us singularly, we'll do the same when it serves our purposes, just as in Ukraine. We have sat out the war, and we'll do so again if it doesn't really serve our purposes.
So a Delhi declaration is on the cards, going by what you've said.
And by the way, may I just very quickly add what the general said, vis-a-vis the GE 414 engine that the agreement is going to be signed for. The fact is, the better solution would have been not to manufacture the whole G414 engine, but to use the Kaveri engine that, for instance, the hot section of the engine, the turbine blades, the single crystal turbine blade technology, and so on. We should have selected technologies that we don't have or we are deficient in and build up our own Kaveri engine. Instead, we are going to now begin manufacturing this, and you can bank on the fact.
Could we talk about the fact that India has got very big shoes to fill? I mean, in the sense we now have, with a free trade agreement possibly going to come through with Britain, with Canada. I mean, this G20 seems to have given us a very, very high profile. Do you want to just talk about the fact that, that India's has got very big shoes to fill is what all I'm asking.
See, firstly, as far as trade agreements and all are concerned, I'm the wrong
person.
more than ignorant about it. But yes, we have, the question is like today only,
Yeah.
I was reading an article in the Chatham House. There, just in the evening, I was reading. They said that this G20 for India is the Beijing 2008 moment.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yes, the Olympics.
That's what he said, quote unquote. That's what. But then the challenges are that our strategic autonomy, our ability to hedge between the countries, we'll have to take a call today, in the world of today, and where the technology in particular is coming in a big way. In technologies, it's very hard to hedge. You have to make a choice. Whose cloud I'm going to plug in? I'm going to plug in into this country's cloud or that country's cloud. So we'll be called upon to make choices. Our scope for hedging will reduce. So those challenges will be there.
That this is going to lead to the Kaveri project being given a secondary status, because we simply don't have the monies to both fund the G414 acquisition and to go full ahead with the Kaveri engine. This is what we need to do. Acquire technologies selectively, the ones that we need, rather than whole systems which are then have their own black box components and so on, which the general knows about. And that really doesn't serve our purposes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor. Thanks very much for coming on the show. Thank you, General. I promise we will get both of you back to have another discussion on the subject. We'll wait and see how it all pans out. But until then, do click on the New Indian Express, the Global Express icon. Thank you, Professor Karnad. Thank you, General Ahuja.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Neena.
Thank you.